Okay, so here I will illustrate the concept of capitalized cost. Assuming that a certain individual by the name of Pedro wants to establish a photocopier shop. So Pedro decided to buy a new set of heavy-duty photocopier at 100,000 pesos. Assuming that according to the manufacturer that this photocopier is good for 4 years. After 4 years, it may be sold as scrap. This photocopier, the first cost, which is equivalent to CO in our previous illustration, is 100,000. The life is 4 years. It has an operating maintenance cost, which is annuity of 5,000 pesos yearly. And then this photocopier may be sold as scrap, a scrap value of 20,000 pesos. So Pedro has a schedule for his cash flow for this photocopier. So, assuming that the salvage value is 20,000 pesos and the cost of the photocopier is 100,000, it means that the cost of service is equal to 80,000 pesos. Or the first cost minus the salvage value is 80,000 pesos. As you may observe that the set of variables here are now different, they are only for um, representation, but they are the same with our previous illustration. CO minus CL is the same as first cost minus salvage value. So here is now the schedule for the cash flow of Pedro. Pedro must first need a capital now, and then at the end of the year, after establishing his photocopier shop, he needs some amount for his maintenance cost, which is 5,000 pesos. At the end of that year again, another maintenance cost. On the third year is a maintenance cost, and on the fourth year is also another maintenance cost. At the end of the fourth year, the photocopier can no more be used because it is already scrap, but the photocopier may be sold at 20,000 pesos. By this time, Pedro needs another photocopier, so Pedro needs to buy photocopier at 100,000 pesos again. Since Pedro has already 20,000 pesos, he only needs 80,000 pesos in order to buy a new set of photocopier. Assuming that Pedro has already 80,000 pesos here, so Pedro can now buy a new set of photocopier, and then assuming that he already has new set of photocopier, then the operation continues. At the end of the year, we have another maintenance cost because the operating maintenance cost is continuous yearly. Another maintenance cost, maintenance cost, maintenance cost. This is another set of 4 years, and the photocopier is now already scrapped. So Pedro will sell the photocopier at 20,000 pesos, and he needs another 80,000 pesos by this time in order to produce 100,000 pesos to buy a new set of photocopier. So assuming by this time that Pedro has already a set of photocopier, then the operation can proceed. And then at the following year or end of the year, Pedro requires or needs 5,000 pesos for operating maintenance and up to these periods. And then again here, he needs another 80,000 pesos to buy a new set of photocopier. This cash flow will continue indefinitely. So here is Pedro, and his dilemma is to determine how much money does he need now in such a way that this money is capable of providing all of his expenses starting today until indefinitely. So Pedro went to the banks. There are three banks here, and each of these banks offers an interest of 10%. Pedro deposited an amount to the first bank amounting to 100,000 pesos. He deposited also another amount on the second bank amounting to 50,000 pesos. And on the third bank, Pedro deposited a mysterious amount of 172,377 pesos. All of this money were deposited on the same day. Now, before the day ends, Pedro realized that he needs 100,000 pesos in order to purchase or to buy the new heavy-duty photocopier. So he went to the first bank and withdrew the 100,000 pesos without earning any interest. So Pedro now has a new photocopier and the operation proceeds. After a year, the money on the second bank earns 10%. The money on the third bank also earns its 10%. Now Pedro needs a maintenance cost of 5,000 pesos, maybe for oiling, for lubrication, or for minor repair. He go to the second bank and withdraw 5,000 pesos, leaving only the 50,000 pesos. And then, on the end of the second year, the money on the second bank earns 10%, and the money on the third bank, including its interest, altogether earns interest amounting to 18,962. By this time, Pedro needs 5,000 pesos for operating maintenance and withdrew it from the second bank, leaving only 50,000 pesos. At the end of the third year, the money on the second bank earns 10%. The money on the third bank, including its two interests, altogether earns interest amounting to 20,857. By this time, Pedro needs 5,000 pesos, so he withdrew it from the second bank. And at the end of the fourth year, the money on the second bank earns 10%, and the money on the third bank, including its three interests, altogether earned interest amounting to 22,943. By this time, Pedro needs operating maintenance of 5,000 pesos and withdrew it from the second bank. So as you may observe that the second bank deposit is used for the operating maintenance. Now by this time, the photocopier is already scrapped and it cannot be used for printing. So Pedro sell the photocopier for 20,000 pesos. Since Pedro now has 20,000 pesos and the new set of photocopier costs 100,000 pesos, Pedro needs another 80,000 pesos in order to have 100,000 pesos to buy a new set of photocopier. So Pedro went or go to the third bank and asked the manager to compute the total amount in that bank. The principal amount is 172,377, and he asked to compute the total interest accumulated for the period of 4 years. It is exactly 80,000 pesos. So Pedro withdraws the amount of 80,000 pesos, leaving only the amount 172,377. 80,000 pesos plus the amount from the scrap, which is 20,000 pesos, is 100,000 pesos, is now capable of buying a new set of photocopier. Assuming that we now have new set of photocopier, the operation now proceeds. At the end of that year, the amount 50,000 pesos earns 10%. The amount 170,377 earns 10%. By this time, Pedro's needs 5,000 pesos for operating maintenance. So he withdrew that from the second bank. And at the end of the next year, this amount earns another 10%. On the third bank, the original amount earns interest including its interests amounting to 18,962. Pedro needs another 5,000 for operating maintenance by this time, so we do that from the second bank. And the third year, the money on the second bank earns 10%. The money on the third bank, including its three interests, altogether earn an interest amounting to 20,857. By this time, Pedro needs 5,000 pesos for the operating maintenance of the photocopier. So he withdrew that from the second bank. Then the next set or on the following year, the money on the second bank earns 5,000 pesos. The money on the third bank, including its three interests, altogether earn an interest amounting to 22,943. By this time, Pedro needs another operating maintenance. This operating maintenance may not be used for lubrication or minor repair because the machines are already scrapped. This amount may be used for other maintenance um, amounting to 5,000 pesos. Okay, by this time, Pedro needs 80,000 pesos because he just sold the photocopier for 20,000 pesos. So he needs another 80,000 pesos um, in order to produce 100,000 pesos to buy a new set of photocopier. So he go to the third bank and ask the manager to compute the total amount accumulated by the amount. And then the total amount accumulated is 80,000 pesos. He withdrew 80,000 pesos plus the 20,000 pesos is 100,000 pesos is capable of buying a new set of photocopier. Assuming we already have new set of photocopier, the following year there is another. Okay, so we'll now determine how Pedro determined the amount necessary to be deposited on the different banks. So we'll determine now the capitalized cost or the initial capital Pedro needs in order to provide all of his cash flow from now until indefinitely. Okay? So if we want to determine the present worth of all of this cash flow, we have this amount. The present worth, of course, first is the the first cost. Here is the first cost, which is the principal or the present cost necessary to purchase the photocopier. So we write here first cost. The first cost is a present cost. It is on year zero. Now we have the operating maintenance costs, which is in the form of annuity. Since this annuity coincides with a period of compounding, which is yearly, then we may compute its present worth using an annuity formula. The annuity formula in this case, because this annuity continues indefinitely, is called perpetuity, and that formula is whatever is that annuity divided by the worth of money. So since our annuity in that case is the operating maintenance divided by I is the present worth of that annuity. Now, in order to determine how much money must be deposited on the third bank, we have this analysis. Assuming that amount, we must be able to withdraw this amount on the third bank. This is to be used for repurchases, reconstruction, or any other recurring costs, not coinciding on the maintenance cost. As you can see, this is also periodic but not yearly. Okay? So how much money must be deposited now in such a way that it will accumulate an interest of equivalent to R at the end of the 4 years? This is our analysis, assuming that the amount of money to be deposited on the third bank is X, which is equivalently 172,000 something in our third bank. This money will accumulate an interest for a period of 4 years. After 4 years, we set aside the capital, leaving only the interest. Now we must only withdraw the interest, which is the R. So the R in this case is only the interest accumulated on the third bank. Now we can compute the value of X. Using the algebra, we can compute that X is equal to R divided by 1 plus I raised to L minus 1, where L is the life of the machine because this is the period that we require a new machine. So the present worth of all of these recurring costs is equal to X, where our X is equal to this value. Okay, so let's try this. This is now the formula for the capitalized cost. The capitalized cost simply means the present worth of all of the cash flow or present worth of all of the cash necessary in the operations. Take note um, that Pedro did not need any other amount. So, because he already had that capital P. Because the capital P is sufficient to provide for all of the expenses from the first cost to the maintenance cost to all other recurring costs. As for example, if the first cost is 11,000 pesos, then the operating maintenance, as we have computed, operating maintenance is 5,000. If we divide it by zero point 0.1, which is the interest rate, we will get 50,000 pesos. That's why the amount deposited on the second bank is 50,000 pesos. Now, to compute for the money required for the recurring cost, we have this formula, and this is equal to 80,000 pesos is the amount of money required to purchase new machine because we have sold the machine for 20,000, so meaning we only need 80,000. This is equal to that mysterious number of 172,377. So Pedro's capitalization or capitalized cost is 100,000 plus 50,000 plus 172,377. This is the only money that Pedro needs now, and all of this money is sufficient to provide all of his expenses from now on until indefinitely. Okay, let us try this problem. A bridge is constructed for 20 million. The estimated annual maintenance costs is 400,000. If the interest rate is 8% per year, what is the capitalized cost of the bridge? Well, here's the formula for our capitalized cost. In other formula, this is represented by another variable, but in my case, I will use P to mean that this is the present worth of all of our costs. Now, let's identify the provisions here. The maintenance cost, 400,000. We have an operating maintenance. If the interest rate is 8% per year, we have the I, we have the 20 million as the first cost, and there is no mention of reconstruction or repair of the bridge. Therefore, this bridge is assumed to be immortal. So we don't have repair, we don't have reconstruction costs. So we will eliminate the last term here. And then we'll substitute all of the given. We have 20 million plus 400,000 divided 0.08. Determine the um, capitalized cost. Okay, an equipment costs 100,000 and will have a scrap value of 50,000 pesos after 10 years. If the money is worth 5% per annum, determine the annual cost of the equipment. Okay, here is our formula again. Let's identify the provisions. We have the initial cost of 100,000, the scrap value of 50,000, okay, for 10 years. Okay, the life is 10 years. If money is worth 5% per annum, determine the annual cost. Okay, there is no mention of operating maintenance, so we'll eliminate that term. Now, let's identify the R here. What is the R? We have 50,000. This is the scrap value of this equipment, and the life is 10 years. So L is 10. And what is our R? Well, we have to determine the value of our R first. Our R is not 50,000. Definitely not 50,000 because 50,000 is the scrap value. R here is the amount of money required to purchase or um, to purchase the new equipment. So let's determine first the first cost is 100,000. The salvage value is 50,000. the I is 5%, then we can determine that the recurring cost, which is actually a reconstruction cost or a repurchase cost. But in this case, since this is an equipment, then it must be a repurchase cost. 100,000, this is the original cost of the equipment, less 50,000 is 50,000. Okay? So since the equipment can be sold for 50,000, then we need only another 50,000 in order to have 100,000 in order for us to buy new equipment. So substituting everything to this equation, we can yield we could yield the capitalized cost. Okay, so let's now proceed to bond. Assuming here that I have a piece of paper, I write in here 10 million pesos and a period of 5 years and a rate of 1%. These three numbers are the main components of a bond. The amount, which is 10 million, is the face value of the bond, or sometimes it is called the par. The 5 years term is the maturity period of the bond. The 1% in this case is called the rate of the bond, or also called the coupon. And then I look for an investor who is willing to buy this bond. Assuming there is an investor willing to buy this bond for some amount, so I give this investor this bond, and in return, the investor gives me an amount. Let's say an amount of 6,588,292. Now I have a cash that I can use for maybe for my business or for other investment. At the end of the year, at the end of the year, I must pay my obligation to the investor, which is sometimes called the dividend. The obligation is equal to the rate of the bond times the face value. Since the rate of the bond is 1% and the face value is 10 million, then 1% of 10 million is 100,000 pesos. So the investor has the right to collect from me that amount. And on the following year, the investor also collect another 100,000 from me, equivalent to the face value times the rate of the bond. The same, on the third year, we have another 100,000 pesos, and on the fourth year up to the fifth year. Now, since the term of this bond is 5 years, after 5 years the bond is considered to be matured. By that time, I can only extinguish my obligation to the investor upon payment of the redemption amount. The redemption amount is sometimes equivalent to the face value of the bond, but sometimes this value may also differ depending on the agreement between the investor and the original owner of the bond. So assuming that I redeem the bond equivalent to the amount of the par, so I give the investor the 10 million pesos and the investor returned to me the bond. So the redemption price is equal to the face value of the bond if there is no stipulation attached to the bond. So the investor now returned to me the bond. So how did the investor compute the price of the bond? The investor, upon the payment of the bond, imagined a fictitious bank. In his mind, he imagined that there is such bank which offers an interest of say 10%. per annum. Upon the payment of the bond, these investors imagine that he is depositing the same amount to that bank. Then, at the end of the year, this amount will earn an interest of 10%. And then the investor withdraws an amount of 100,000 pesos after the year. And then the money left in the bank is also earning the interest. And then at the end of the second year, the investor withdraw 100,000 pesos. And then the money left also earned interest. And then the investor withdraw 100,000 at the end of the third year. The money still continues to earn interest up to the fourth year and up to the fifth year, while withdrawing 100,000 pesos for every end of the year. Now, at the end of the fifth year, the investor imagined that he is going to withdraw the remaining amount from the bank, and the remaining amount, including the interest, is equal to 10 million pesos. So this is the perspective of the investor. So if we look at the uh, behind the scene, this is what's happening to the cash in the bank. The initial deposit is 6,588, 292. At the end of the year, this amount will gain 10%. And then the investor withdraws 100,000 pesos, leaving an amount of 7,147,121. This is now the beginning of the second year. After a year, after a year from this period, this amount of money will earn 10%. And then the investor withdraws 100,000, leaving an amount of 7,761,833. The money again will earn 10%, and at the same time withdraw 100,000, leaving an amount of 8,438,016 from in that bank. And then this amount will earn another 10%, and we withdraw 100,000 at the end of that year, and then the remaining amount in the bank is 9,181,818. And then this money will earn its 10%, and then we withdraw 100,000, leaving an amount of 10 million pesos. Now, this is now at the fifth year. At the fifth year, we withdraw the remaining amount in the bank, which is exactly 10 million pesos. Okay, so how did the investor compute the price of the bond? Here is the computation. As what we can observe that this is actually composed of an ordinary annuity, the present cost of the ordinary annuity, and a single payment at the end of the period. So if we compute the present worth of all of the annuity, we have this annuity of 100,000 per year, which is in this case our A. In the case of bond, this is equal to the face value times the rate of the bond, where M is the maturity period of the bond. Aside from that, we also have the present worth of the 10 million or the redemption. In this case, we have the face value divided by the present worth factor of a single payment. Now, if there is a stipulation, which is the redeem price is different from the face value, then we replace that amount by R. Then we can compute the present worth of the bond. In this case, the face value of the bond is 10 million. So in the redemption price is the same as the face value, and the maturity is 5 years. In this case, the investor assumed that he wants to earn 10% from his investment. So our R in this case is 1% in here, the rate of the bond, and the interest that this investor wants to earn is 10%. Substituting everything to the equation, we can compute that the present worth equivalent of the bond is 6,588,292. Okay, let's try this. How much should a prospective investor pay for a bond if he desires a 6% return of his investment and the bond will return 5,000 peso per year for 20 years and 100,000 pesos after 20 years? Okay, this is our formula to compute for the present worth of the bond, which is the price of the bond. The FR, although the problem did not indicate the rate of the bond, but it states that the bond will return 5,000 per year. This indeed is the FR. And the redemption price is stated here, which is different from the face value of the bond, 100,000 pesos. Although because we do not know the face value of the bond. And then the maturity is 20 years. And I, which is the desired interest, which is the interest of the fictitious bank the investor is referring to. Substituting everything to the equation, we can compute that the present worth of this bond is 88,530. Thus, this is the maximum amount an investor pay to the owner of the bond in order for him to gain an interest of 6% to this investment. Okay, let's proceed. A bond with a par value of 1,000 and with a bond rate of 10% payable annually sold now for 1,500 pesos. If the yield is to be 12%, how much should the redemption be at the end of 8 years? This is our formula to compute for the present worth of the bond. The present worth of the bond is given, that is, it is sold now for 1,500 pesos. That is our P. And the FR 1,000 is the face value of the bond. The rate of the bond is 10%. So our FR is 100. And the rate and maturity of the bond or the term of the bond is 8 years. The desired income from this or the desired uh, yield is 12%. Okay, so the only unknown here is now the R. So we can now compute the R, and that is equal to 2,484, the redemption price of the bond. Okay, I will now proceed to the break-even analysis. Assuming that you have a pineapple business and that we want to calculate the break-even of your business. So when you put up a business, you have costs. There are two types of cost. One is the cost that does not change or does not depend on your sales, such as, for example, um, cost of rent of space. Okay, these costs are called the fixed cost. An example of which is the rent of space. So let's say you're renting a space for 10,000 monthly. This is a fixed cost. If you have a sale, you'll have 10,000 rent. If you don't have a sale, you still have 10,000 rent. Okay, now there's another cost, a type of cost that depend on your sales, which we call as the variable cost. For example, um, the packaging of the apple is worth 10 pesos, meaning if you sell one apple, it incur you a cost corresponding to the cost of that packaging, because each apple requires a packaging. So if you sell some X amount of apple, the total amount of cost due to the packaging is 10 for each apple for a total of X apples. Okay, so these are the costs you incurred. We have the fixed cost, and we also have the variable cost. Okay, so when you sell your apple, you will have revenue. The revenue depends on the price of the apple. Assuming that the price of the apple is P for each apple, and you sell X apples, then your total revenue is equal to PX. Or so let's say if the cost of each apple is 25 peso, I mean you're selling the apple for 25 peso each. For X apples, your total revenue is 25 times X. So in order for your business to be profitable, your revenue must be greater than your total cost. For example, if you sell a single apple, meaning you have a revenue of 25 pesos. But if we compare that to the costs, one, you have a cost for the packaging, which is 10. Aside from 10 peso of cost for packaging, you also incurred a monthly cost, assuming that you only have one apple sold for that month. So, one apple sold for that month will give you a revenue of 25, but will incur you 10 peso cost for the packaging. Plus, of course, you incurred a rental cost of 10,000 pesos, regardless of you have a sale or no sale. So the purpose of break-even analysis is to determine how many apples would you sell in such a way that it is exactly equal to the expense. In this case, you can compute that the total number of apples to be sold for break-even is 667. Okay, let's try this problem. A company which manufactures electric motors has a production capacity of 200 motors per month. The variable cost at 100 per motor. The average selling price of the motor is 275. Fixed cost of the company amount to 20,000 pesos per month, which includes taxes. Find the number of motors that must be sold each month to break even. Okay, this is our revenue. The price of motor is 275. We sell X number of motors. And this is also our expenses. The fixed cost, which is 20,000 pesos, plus the cost to sell each motor is 100. Since we are selling X motors, then the total cost is 100X. Okay, now let's compute the X. Then we say that the least number of motor to be produced or to be sold is 143. If we sell less than 143, then we lose in our income. So take note also that if your X is greater than 200, then this business is not profitable because we cannot sell more than 200 motors because the production capacity is only 200. Okay, a company incurs a yearly fixed cost of 200,000 pesos. Each product produced by company costs 150 pesos. If this product sells at 200 peso each, how many products must be produced in order for the company to avoid taking loss? Okay, our revenue 200 is the selling price, X number of this product. This is the total revenue. Our cost, we have the fixed cost of 200,000 plus the variable cost of, since each product costs 150 to produce X of these products, this is the total variable cost. Solving for X, we get 4,000 of these products. Okay,